Welcome to my course about Nevada revised statutes on Senate Bill 439. This particular version of Senate Bill 439 is from the 2023 legislative session of the Nevada legislature. I am Jay Cafferata, and I will be your host today. A little bit about me. I hold a master's degree in communications and an associate's degree in deaf studies. I am also a certified diversity executive. I teach cultural competency courses for healthcare as well as for professional development. I have been involved in the legislative processes that have created these laws and personally testified on these bills while they were being created during the Nevada legislature. I am not a lawyer or a legal analyst. These laws pertain to Nevada only. Other states may have similar laws, but the ones I'm discussing here are Nevada specific. Please check with your administrator, supervisor, or licensing board as to the application of the laws and how they may impact you. Again, I am not a lawyer, and my interpretation may be different from the licensing board or the Department of Health and Human Services. All right, so let's take a look at who is actually covered by this new law. Currently, this is from the digest or the summary of the proposed law. Now, here in Nevada, you can go onto the legislative or the legislature's website and you can look at all the bills that were passed or turned into law during the last session. Well, every session, actually. And one thing to note is that when you look at the text of these bills, which became law, you must look at the enrolled version because that is the version that was sent to the governor, and that's the one that he signed, and that's the one that is now in effect. So again, this is from the summary of the proposed law. Now, this particular Senate bill was over 80 pages long, I think, but there's some very specific parts that I want to pull out that are pertinent to this conversation. So who is covered by this law? It is NRS 630, 632, and 633. Now, there are different sections of this bill that is going to discuss this. So section 27 is that it authorizes any provider of healthcare to use training in place of any other training they're also required to do for continuing education. And I'll talk about more in a minute. Sections 28 through 30 and 75 require and specify this continuing education that has to do with HIV, stigma, discrimination, and unrecognized bias. So let's just look at these different sections. We're going to start with section 75, which seems kind of counterintuitive, but it just talks about in the biggest, broadest term. So it is for a physician, an osteopathic physician, or a physician assistant, and they are licensed under NRS 630 or 633, or a nurse who provides or supervises the provision of emergency medical services in a hospital or in primary care. So that means anybody who is a physician, an osteopathic or a DO, or a physician assistant or a nurse that operates in a hospital or in primary care. Now, if you look at the bottom of this, you can see where it says primary care is defined as the practice of family medicine, pediatrics, internal medicine, obstetrics, gynecology, and midwifery. So again, these are the professionals that are required to complete this training starting in January of 2024. So one of the other things that this law now specifies is what must be included in the content for a training that meets these requirements. It says very clearly 2 hours of training in the stigma, discrimination, and unrecognized bias toward persons who have acquired or at a high risk of acquiring human immunodeficiency virus or HIV. So that is folks who have it, folks who are at a higher risk of acquiring, and those are kind of people who are intimate with someone who has HIV or someone you assume may have HIV. It's not always the same. But when we talk about discrimination and stigma, that's where people make assumptions about who is HIV positive or HIV negative. And that's what we're talking about in those ways. So let's go through the different sections. Again, SB 439 covers these groups. It's NRS 630, 632, and 633. Now, under all of these chapters, it says the board shall not renew any license issued under this chapter unless this training is completed. So we'll go through each of these chapters in a minute. Who is eligible to use this HIV, stigma, discrimination, and unrecognized bias course for continuing education requirements is a much larger list. And that is regardless of if their licensing board mentions it or requires it in statute. So everyone that's going to be, I'm going to show you this huge list in a minute. And those are all the people who can also use this course for continuing education requirements. And it doesn't have to be approved by the board, the licensing board that they report to or that they renew their license with. So the sections, again, I said we're going to go through the sections. In section 27, it talks about this whole thing again, in place of not more than 2 hours each of the continuing education requirements. So again, anyone licensed under NRS 629, which is a healthcare provider, may use this course regardless of their licensing board requirements. So your licensing board doesn't have to state it because it's in this law and it will be applied to you regardless. So who are the folks that we're talking about here? Now, my apologies, these are very small words and very small letters. It says any provider of health, an anesthesiologist, an anesthesiology assistant, a dentist, a licensed nurse, an audiologist, an optometrist, speech pathologist, dispensing optician, practitioner of respiratory care, physical therapist, occupational therapist, podiatric. So those are those podiatrists that you go to for your feet. A licensed psychologist. There's more though, and it's this whole list. So again, a licensed marriage and family therapist, a licensed clinical professional counselor, a music therapist, chiropractors, athletic trainers. So athletic trainers work in gyms, but they are considered healthcare providers in the state of Nevada, and they must take this course. So all of these things, and again, you'll be able to look these up again, because as I always say, don't take my word for it. Please look it up on your own, and I will show you where those links are in a moment. So nope, in NRS 630, and there's these three statutes, 630, 632, and 633. In 630, these are the people that are licensed under this chapter: administrative physicians, medical assistants, perfusionists, physicians, physician assistants, practitioner of respiratory care, supervising physician, and a temporarily licensed perfusionist. And again, you can type in NRS and any of these numbers, and it will take you right to that chapter or the exact location in the statute. NRS 632 is typically about nurses. And in this particular case, these are all the nurses, including a medication aid, is part of 632. So all nurses are required to take a 2-hour HIV course. In NRS 633, this is the osteopathic, the physician assistant, and the supervising osteopathic physician. Again, these are all just the different licensing chapters. So you will probably fall under, if you're a healthcare provider, you will fall under one of these chapters, because under NRS 629, that defines who falls under healing arts in the state of Nevada. And that is all those people that I just showed you that huge list for. So again, sections 28 through 30 and 75 of this bill require such a provider of healthcare to take at least 2 hours of training in stigma, discrimination, and unrecognized bias toward persons who have acquired or are at a high risk of acquiring HIV. So this is what it looks like in the proposed law or the bill. And now let's look at each of these sections. This is section 28. Now you may notice that it goes A, B, G, and D. And that's because in the way that laws are written, they're not always neatly consecutive. So 630 refers to physician's assistants, osteopathic medicine. I'm sorry, physicians and physician's assistants, and anyone who holds a license to practice medicine. So again, these are the people, and in primary care, family medicine, pediatrics, internal medicine, obstetrics, gynecology, and midwifery. That's section 28. Section 29 is all about nurses. And again, it pretty much says exactly the same thing, and it's just listed out specifically for each one of these NRS chapters. And here's section 30. Osteopathic medicine, physician assistant, or anyone who supervises those kinds of licensed folks. Now, at the very beginning, I showed you this particular part, which is section 75. So I just want to point out again that these are required by 630, 632, and 633. 28, 29, and 30 of this act. So it's very clear who's covered by this. And now, again, what is it that you have to do? You have to have at least 2 hours of training in stigma, discrimination, and unrecognized bias towards people who have HIV or are at risk. Again, all of this goes into effect on January 1, and it says that it's a minimum of 2 hours. However, licensing boards say that you can take a course that's longer and it will apply towards your continuing education unit requirements for your license renewal. As I started at the beginning of this course, I am a cultural competency provider, and I have created a course that meets the requirements of SB 439, and it is currently available in English. You can find it at this link, courses.asltraining.com/courses/HIV Stigma. But if you go on to www.asltraining.com, you'll be able to see all the courses that are available. This course will also be available in Spanish by the end of this year. So if you're looking for the Spanish version, that will soon be available as well. So thank you very much for watching this presentation about Senate Bill 439 from the 82nd session of the Nevada legislature. You may contact me at j@asltraining.com. You can go on my website and contact me there. Please like and subscribe to my channel to learn more as these laws change and the regulations are developed. Thank you again.